Hey everyone, welcome back to On Purpose, the number one place you come to become happier, healthier, and more healed. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Today, I'm so excited because I talked to a really good friend, someone that I respect so highly and admire so deeply, and I've had the fortune of knowing for the last couple of years. I'm talking about David Coe, the CEO of Calm, the leading app for meditation and mindfulness, and a new author of his book, Recharge, that offers tips for the best mental wellness practices in today's digital world. The book has interviews with rappers, rebels, and innovators as he travels talking about stress, burnout, and feeling drained. If any of you are feeling stressed right now, this episode's for you. If you're feeling drained from work right now, this episode's for you. And if you need to recharge, this book and episode is for you. Please welcome to On Purpose, the CEO of Calm, David Coe. David, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Jay, for having me here today. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited because I really feel like ever since we met, I felt like we hit it off.
Right away.
Yeah, right away.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate enough to have you interview me so many times. So I'm glad I get to repay the favor this time round. And I wanted to ask you, just to get our blood boiling, just to start with some fun, I wanted to ask you, David, what's something that you're not calm about?
I think there's a lot of things that I'm not calm about throughout my day. I will tell you right now, I am in the throes of my oldest daughter applying to colleges. Even though I try to appear very calm in front of her and cool and collective, and you don't want to be like a helicopter type of parent. There are times where I'm just like, I want to get in there and say something, but I realize almost like the best thing for her is for her to go through it. And I have to kind of take a back seat. And so it's kind of going from where you take the wheel to like you're in the passenger seat and then you're in the back seat kind of peering every once in a while. But I can't help myself from like, I don't know, when she first learned to drive by like saying, oh, I'm stepping on the brake here and there, right? But that's one thing right now that is probably a little stressful.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I read a study that said we process around 72 gigabytes of information per day, which the research likened to reading Tolkien's The Hobbit every single day. That's nearly 96,000 words.
Right.
And you think about that and you go, no wonder we're overwhelmed. No wonder we're burnt out. No wonder we're stressed. And you have this really brilliant analogy comparing the brain and our mind to a battery.
That's right.
Walk us through this because I really like this in your book, Recharge, the way you break it down and explain it.
The Recharge came from a good friend of mine. And we were talking about mental health. And I just asked her, I said, how's it going with your kids? And she goes, I was talking to my kids and I just said, how's your battery? And I was like, wait, what? And she goes, well, I said, how's your battery? I said, why? And she said, well, if I ask them how they're doing, I get the plain fine. And because they're kids, they're just like, I'm fine. But if I ask them like, how's your battery? They're like, well, it's at like 50%. Or so you may need a snack because they're little. Or it's at 75%. She's like, oh, you're okay. Or sometimes they're at 25% and they just need something, to decompress. While we were talking about it, a light bulb just went out. And that light bulb that went on was about like, she took something that at times can be charged and she took something and really simplified in a way that I think we would all understand, regardless of age. And I asked her, I was like, can I run with that? And she was like, yeah, sure, whatever, right? And we still laugh about it, Brenda and I, because she's like, wow, you actually took it. And I was like, yeah, I used it as a theme. I talk about it. I go to clients, I'll go out, and it just kind of resonates with people because it's simple. And it doesn't kind of draw out any emotions. It just says like, hey, how's your battery? How are you feeling? And I think that sometimes that gets lost because we try to make it bigger sometimes than it is. And it's really nice when you can kind of just simplify it and just ask you, how's your battery? How you doing?
I love the question, how's your battery, even more than how you doing, like you said, because I think sometimes I think you also mentioned that we can scale everything up to a 10.
That's right.
So everything can feel like it's a 10, it's the worst. Or everything can feel like, oh, it's just plain old fine.
That's right.
and then you don't have much to play with. Whereas when you get a number, walk us through the different breakdowns as you do in the book.
Yeah.
Because I think when you look at 0 to 100, we're very good at feeling 0 and maybe 100, right? Like if it's your kid's wedding, chances are you'll be at 100. If it's like your kid's birthday, like you're at 100. Like there's these joyful, 100%. Blissful moments in life that people experience, and we go, yeah, that was 100 moment. And then we all know what a 0 moment feels like. You lost a loved one who sadly passed away. You lost your job. Like there's these very 0 moments. Walk us through how you break down the 0 to 100.
Yeah, and I try to do it really simply. I have found, and I'll talk about my own kids at times. When I ask them that question, how their battery is, I notice that they check, like most people, they check their phones quite often. And at some point, it just becomes like a reflex. And they don't even know they're checking it. But when they do look at it and the power's down, or it goes yellow, or it goes red, they get a little panicked. Like, oh my God, I got to charge it. Imagine my surprise when we're in like airports and they're like going up to people, can I use a little of your charge, right? Yeah. I think we've all been there where we don't have a charger and usually like, I need something. Can somebody help me out? Most times people are really kind and they'll just, kind of help you, especially if you're a kid. I thought about then putting it into zones, and I put it into 4 zones. And I just said, if you're at 75 to 100, you're probably fine. And meaning that, you're in a zone where you're just moving along. If you're at 50 to 75, you're probably in a place where you might need to start to think about how you may want to recharge. If you're in that 25 to 50, it's time to start figuring out, take a break. You may need to take a walk. You may need to put down the phone. You may need to stop the litany of Zoom calls that you're on right now, right? And if you find yourself 0 to 25, that's a real kind of indicator for you to say, hey, something's probably not right. And I need to really kind of take a hard stop and figure out how I recharge. And recharge can happen in a number of different ways. And so I've often talked about when I've gotten into that zone, I just kind of almost go for a walk. I sometimes go outside. I take some deep breaths. I do a number of things. Sometimes I may need a workout. A workout really helps me to recharge on a personal front. And everyone's a little bit different, and they'll go to different techniques. And so in the book, I list a lot of things in the book that you may do. You may do 1, 2, 3, 4, or all of them. And they're just really techniques for you to figure out what works for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I really like that breakdown because I think we're all better when we're measuring things with numbers.
That's right.
There's a specificity there.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those people. I think the way your phone is charged says so much about you as a person. So my phone is always charged.
Yeah.
I'm very rarely below 30% or 40% on my phone. And I think I try and monitor my personal health in a similar way.
Right.
As soon as I feel myself going below 50%, I know it's time for an early night. I know it's time to cancel weekend plans. I canceled a dinner this evening for that exact reason. I got back from work yesterday. I started work yesterday at like 8:30 a.m. and I got back from a shoot at 9:30 p.m. And I knew I had a dinner tonight, and I just said, I'm so sorry I can't make it.
Good for you.
Because I knew I had a busy day today. I was interviewing you. I was interviewing another guest. And I was like, I want to be really present for that. It's really critical stuff. And then I need to recharge, using your word, I need to recharge this evening. And I'm always shifting things to recharge. And I love that idea because I think we hear the word rest. And then sometimes we feel guilty. We shouldn't, but we feel guilty like, oh, I don't have time to rest.
Yeah.
But when you think of it about recharging, you're reframing it and going, oh, I do need to recharge because otherwise, how am I going to give my best tomorrow?
100%. 100%. And, it's funny. You and me are the same on batteries. I keep my battery pretty charged as well. I have an electric car too. I marvel at people who can take that electric car battery down to 5%.
I can't do it.
That stresses me out. I'm stressed out when they tell me these stories. Oh, I took the battery down to 5%. I'm like, seriously? How? I mean, and they're like, oh, it's fine. Yeah. And for some people it works, right? For me, that doesn't work. No. I'm plugging in that battery every night and I'm going to make sure I charge that battery up. Others will let it go pretty low. Everyone's a little bit different that works for them.
Yeah.
I've asked some of my friends who charge it, go really low, and they're like, well, if I charge it too much, I get stressed.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, it can work the other way.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's got to kind of work for you and how you want to recharge and different techniques that you want to do. You're never really going to have a stress-free work environment. Anxiety, depression, and then starts to lead to physical ailments because we know there's a linkage. Good stress could lead to resilience. It could lead to growth. It actually could lead to a stronger culture.
I was wondering if someone's at a 0, when you ask them, how's your battery?
Yeah.
And if someone says, I'm at 5, and I'm talking about emotionally, mentally, not their car or their phone, what would you say to them? How would you communicate with them some of these tools when you're at 0?
I've learned to take the space, to give them space so we can actually have a proper conversation. If you find someone at a really low percentage, and I may ask that person, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And most of the time you just want I'm good, because then you just want to keep going. And I find that often in the business world as well, not just in the personal world, but in the business world. We don't want a response, or sometimes we don't have the time to be if that person who you're asking the question to says, I'm not doing so hot and I'm not doing so well, then what do you do? So I'm very intentional when I ask some of these questions to individuals so that I'm ready for that response if I'm not doing well, like a 5%. So I kind of want to frame it there.
I love that. Yeah.
I think sometimes you rush through these conversations. And then when they do tell you they're a 5 or a 10, I think the best things that I have found is you have to be present for them. You have to listen. You do such a brilliant job at that, Jay, because even in this type of environment, we know as we have this one-to-one conversation, if I was telling you I was a 5 or a 0, you'd be all in on this and you would hear me out. And then you would start to tell me, okay, let's talk about what's causing that. And I've had at times where family members have come to me and said, hey, I'm at a 5. And we start to break it down. And I said, let me put it another way for you. Think about your phone. And we do checks on our phone. And there's things on your phone that drain your battery more than other applications. And they're like, yeah, it's like when you go and Apple shows you what's draining or taking up all your memory. And what happens when you start to delete some of those things? Or what happens when you start to recognize what's causing it? They're like, oh, my battery is much more efficient. And I'm like, yeah. So what's causing that in your personal life right now?
Yeah.
And we try to create analogies of different things. And so it doesn't become a space where all we're doing is talking about all the negativity. We're trying to draw parallels to different things in everyday life. And so that it doesn't become such a charged conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of the recharge concept as well, where we're like, let's talk about your mental health. Because sometimes some people don't want to talk about their mental health. Mm-hmm. But when we bring up the battery conversation or how to recharge, it's just a different framing. And again, this is something I think you just do brilliantly to bring everyone in. And I try to do the same thing there as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that actually, because I've always felt that with you. You've always been present with different touch points, whether we're at dinners, events, where even when we've traveled and seen each other, when we're in New York for a dinner for Time earlier this year, you're always present too. And I wonder, how do you do that as a busy CEO? Because I think you're so right that when we ask the question, how are you doing? We are subconsciously hoping someone just says, I'm good. We almost ask the question and expect the response even before we have a response. You're so right. Like that really resonated with me. And the truth is sometimes life is fast for most of us, right? Our schedules are back to back to back. We are running from dropping your kid to school, running to work, picking up the laundry, doing the laundry, whatever, right? There's so much going on. Yep. How do you actually create space for these conversations?
And that's part of being a lot more present and intentional as leaders. And I'd be curious now for you as CEO as well. We're expected to have all the answers. We're expected to make many different types of decisions. We're expected to play roles in HR, but also company strategy. And, when you take a step back, you can't make every decision. And then there's always things that are the unexpected. Take your car analogy. So when you had your car and you were at 30%, you were probably with someone, but in the back of your mind, you're going, how am I going to get home? Where am I going to charge? And you could do this probably better than most, but you still want to be present for that individual that you're with or your friends that you're with in those conversations. And what I find is sometimes we as leaders have to make the space. Sometimes we as leaders have to show something that you do absolutely brilliantly, is to show a vulnerable side to them and talk about our own stories. I find that many CEOs today aren't vulnerable. I, for one, was not very good at being vulnerable. When I wrote the book, though, I was just taken back at how many people who I met for the first time were so open and honest and vulnerable with myself. And it got me thinking, well, if they can do it, why can't I do it? Right? And if I start to show some of that vulnerability at work, if I start to give a little bit of space and more time for that conversation, would that then make it just more open for others and more safe for others to have the conversation? Because if I'm not having that conversation and saying, here's my own journey, then they may feel that it's not okay for them to open up as well. Right? I'd just be curious, like you as CEO, right? You've got all these different businesses. How do you do that with your own employees?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it comes to the balance. So vulnerability is a great point. And I really appreciate that, because I do agree that if you create space to share what you're going through with your teams, they then have the permission to do the same. And I think I was mentioning when we did a panel at Calm Coast a month ago or so, I was talking about a client of mine that I was coaching who's the CEO of a very large corporation. And we'd gone through a transformation. They were saying to me, Jay, I'm feeling good. And I was like, great. Well, you should tell your team about your journey. And they were like, how can I tell them?
Right.
And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, if I tell them, they're going to think I'm weak. And I was like, no, I promise you, they're going to think you're strong. And I think we're still redefining and reframing strength in the world today. I think there are some of us who still see bravado and arrogance and chauvinism as being strong. And I think that's shifting, but it's shifting very slowly.
That's right.
And so it is a cultural expectation as well, societal expectation of strength being this kind of facade. But I think a lot of us are now realizing, well, no, strength is being able to show both sides and open up and be vulnerable. I think the other thing that really comes to mind when I'm thinking about being CEO is I think stress can make people work harder. But it's the right amount of stress that makes someone work better.
So good. So true.
Right?
That's
There's
so
a spectrum of stress.
So true.
And so if I just keep checking in with someone and going, have you done it yet? Are you done yet? Why are we not there yet? Why did the numbers not triple this? If I do that, they're going to feel stress. And they may work harder, but that doesn't mean they work better.
That's right.
And so to me, the right amount of stress, and I want to ask you this as well, talk to me about the difference between good stress and bad stress.
Yeah.
And how you've been able to harness the right amount when you've got it right.
In the book, actually, I interviewed Dr. Aditi Nurikar, and you met her.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Fantastic, right? Yeah. And we got into this whole conversation of good stress, bad stress. Use stress, good stress versus bad stress, distress. And, we talked about how good stress could lead to resilience. It could lead to growth. It actually could lead to a stronger culture. You're never really going to have a stress-free work environment.
Agreed.
We're always going to have stress at work. We're all going to have deadlines. We're all going to have things we're going to want to hit. But not everything has to be, just like you said, 24/7, 365, because at some point, it's going to stack so much that you as a leader are realizing you're probably not being very efficient. Your employees are probably not working super efficiently, not working well together. And you've caused a lot of bad stress, distress in their life. That's leading to things like anxiety, depression, and then starts to lead to physical ailments, because we know there's a linkage between, your mental health and your physical health. And so that becomes a very vicious cycle, especially in the workplace. And that leads to a lot of unproductivity. What I've found with the two is you really have to find that right balance and understand there will be, and just talk about it. There's a push. We're all going to make a push. We did it recently as a company at Calm, where around the elections, and we treated the elections like our Super Bowl moment, because we knew and we saw the data that people's stress was rising every day as that day, November 5th, got closer and closer. We saw it in the App Store. We saw it in comments. We saw it on social. So we really came together as a company to do different types of things around that. Take a breath, 30 seconds or 15 seconds of silence. We showed animals from the San Diego Zoo on Instagram, and we got so many people commenting that day that said, hey, thank you for the silence. Thank you for my 15 seconds in this world where so many things are happening. Now, people were dialing in from work because they were stressed at work. Stress doesn't just mean it's at home. It was like people were like during the elections coming in from work. And so we wanted to give them a little bit so they had a release so they could be more productive. So there's a lot of things around stuff that I look at for good stress and bad stress and recognize there's always going to be a push-pull. But that's the part where you can't do it alone. You got to have a good team. You got to talk about it. You do this so well and make sure that becomes part of your fabric, your culture, your DNA. And I think it's shifting, but it's slow.
Yeah.
I think the conversation around mental health in everyday life, it's the most approachable it's ever been, right? I talk about things with my own kids today around mental health. When I was a child coming, I'd be curious, like for you, like immigrant family, we didn't talk about our mental health in my household, right? We talked more about powering through things. And I can talk about that later, but we didn't really talk about it. My kids talk about it. They may overuse it at times, not use it the right way. It's okay. They're having the conversation. Their friends are having the conversation. I think that's great. But when you go to the workplace, it kind of stops, and I go to so many places and I'm like, do you talk about your mental health at work? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, let's change that dialogue. Let's make it as approachable as it is in everyday life. And how do we start to do that? Let's give you the tools and we'll start at the top.
Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. What you're painting a picture of for me is that I look at the good stress being when we all know what challenge we're up against. We know what the goal is and everyone feels supported. And I think what often happens is people don't know what the goal is because you're not helping them do that. They only see the challenge and they don't feel supported.
That's right.
So now they don't know where they're going and they feel if they fall flat on their face, they have nothing to catch them.
That's right.
As a leader, the goal is to provide the goal and the support, and then the person can focus on the challenge.
Yeah, and be transparent in that journey. I speak to many CEOs in the Valley and over the world, and a lot of times I'll ask them, how do you prioritize things with your employees? How transparent are you? And I'll tell you, many of them are not that transparent. Or they'll be like, these are the most important things. And then they'll add 5 more and then 5 more, right? And I'll be like, oh, okay. What did you take away? And they're like, what are you talking about? I mean, what did you take away? And they're like, nothing. And I'm like, well, how do you think that's affecting your employees? And they're like, I never really thought about that. So I've just compounded and stacked the problem as a leader, and you didn't take anything away, and it cascades down like a megaphone. Think about what that employee is going through and walk in their shoes for a minute. We at the top have the luxury of having more control over our schedules, but that person may not have as much control over their schedule. They're just ticking through things.
Yeah.
And if you just keep adding and not taking certain things away and saying, this is important, this isn't important, here's how I think about it, here's how I'm being transparent, you're adding more stress to your company. Leaders struggle with how to be vulnerable. Is it going to be used against me?
Yeah.
Is someone going to write about it and say I'm too weak? Is the board going to think I'm weak as a leader? That's ultimately also a fail of corporate stewardship, because they have to also look after your mental health.
At Calm, I love this. When I first got introduced to Calm and started taking calls with the teams, and I took my role of Chief Purpose Officer, I got integrated into the culture. I loved the little things and the focus on the little things at meetings at Calm, whether they're on Zoom, in person. I want to hear about these smaller things that are happening on a daily basis, because I think often companies think they need to put out a thing that says we're focusing on company mental health and they're doing these big things, but Calm internally, let alone the work they do with other companies and workplaces, but Calm internally had some really nice cultural things that I noticed from the outside in as I was being integrated. Walk us through some of those daily things that you think create the rituals and practices that help people.
It was interesting for me my first day at Com, I walk in and they're Michael and Alex, who you know well, the founders,
Yeah,
right?
I love them.
And they love you and they talk about you all the time and how you all first met. And they introduced me to the company, warm welcome, so inviting. And they started the whole all hands off with a meditation. And I wasn't really used to that, and I was kind of sitting there, and I kind of noticed everyone. And normally we listen to someone like yourself. We'll turn you on, or we'll turn one of our other kind of narrators on. They do great, and everyone just kind of sat there in the moment. And whether it was sometimes it's really quick, 30 seconds, sometimes it's 5-6 minutes, sometimes 3 minutes, and they listened. And it was, and I kind of was peeking at times looking, I'm like, is everyone kind of closing their eyes, around here, looking there. And they were just in the moment. It was a moment for me that showed me how much they cared. And I was like, wow, this company cares. This isn't forced. You don't have to be here. You don't have to do this. And they were there and they were present and they were in the moment. So that's like some of this, that was one of the ways I knew this company was going to be different. And then I watched as the company did things around gratitude, where we end every all hands with gratitude. We read things that have come into us, and it's a reminder of the impact we're having. And I think that's why sometimes I'm so stressed, because I feel this weight of responsibility where every second of every day someone is using the product. And I just feel like if we're not answering them, or not helping them in the moment, someone's not getting something that they need. And I feel that stress, and I feel it's really responsibility.
Yeah.
And I talk about that with the employees. And I think it's really important to talk about that. So we do the gratitude piece at the end. We have Zoom free days, where I talk to employees about, hey, if you're in a moment where you find yourself in 5 Zooms, take a beat. You don't need to do that. And if there's meetings that don't make sense, just like you did tonight, which was great, just say no. It's okay. We'll figure it out. And I do that too. And I try to be a lot more purposeful now, because it helps me then be more present in the meetings that I need to be in.
Yeah.
Right. And rather than saying, it's not the quantity of meetings that I'm in, it's those quality of meeting moments that I'm in. And I think people sometimes like misinterpret like quantity for productivity versus like value. And I'm much more like, okay, I'm going to focus on quality, and it may mean less. And that doesn't have to sacrifice my impact.
I was going to ask you, how does it impact productivity? And I do think that we've convinced ourselves that if I'm doing more, if there's more on my schedule, if I'm jumping around, we've created our definition of value to be around busyness, right?
Yes.
And we all feel we're more important, valuable, and it's subconscious. Again, you just think, oh yeah, if I've got a lot to do, then I must be doing something.
Yeah.
How do we start to shift that conversation? What have you learned about that? I know you interviewed some amazing people as well, as you were saying inside the book. What did you learn about how we can reframe what we believe makes us valuable?
Yeah. So I had, 2 people in particular. So John Scully, for example, the former CEO of Apple, he talked about how in the book he was chief listening officer. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. Like Steve asked that we make our own business cards, and I wrote chief listening officer. And I sat there and I was like, wow, that was great. You listen. And so, because so often, you just start talking. And he's like, no, I became a lot more purposeful if I just listened first, said probably less, but that impact was greater because I heard what was happening. And I thought that was great.
Yeah.
I had Jack Rowe, who's a former CEO of Aetna in the book. He came over and he said, sometimes you have to put yourself into neutral. And he's like, and you have to give yourself space because you can't run at 100 miles an hour. And if you don't give yourself a little bit of a break, no matter what position you're in, you're going to find yourself upside down, and you're not going to figure out how to turn back up. And I appreciated those conversations with them because they're a little bit more old school in their approach. They think we're a little bit more in the middle now. And then there's a younger generation, right, that's coming up who thinks about things completely different. It's been such a privilege to be able to kind of talk to so many different people who are in that continuum to kind of hear how they're managing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even like how you think about things today and how you manage all that, right? It just must be a lot coming at you today